Kimo, for your whole life, you were a professional actor and a stand-up comedian for years, and you've been in communication here. And in my view, that's just all the same work. It's all storytelling and communications. And the Bulletin now is 20 years old. What have you seen as kind of the major changes in the ways in which we communicate with one another and people not with us about these environmental matters over the last 20 years?
Well, two things. First of all, back in the early 90s, information was a whole different animal within an organization than it is right now. Mm-hmm. Information was that thing that the people at the top level in organizations had that gave them enormous power. Mm-hmm. And so they had the information, maybe their deputies might have some information, but it was the people at the top that had all the information because it wasn't as accessible back mm-hmm. then. Over the last 20 years, information has been turned absolutely mm-hmm. upside down in organizations. And now it's people who work in the mailroom who know more about what's happening out in the world and even perhaps within the organization mm-hmm. than do the people at the very top. Well, that's created a vacuum and a need, as the information universe has expanded, for there to be a service, a conduit, a mechanism where decision makers at the top mm-hmm. can get information without having to wade through mm-hmm. so much stuff that's mm-hmm. out there. So, in answer to your question, I think the first biggest change has been the emergence of a new role that's played in organizations of a knowledge broker, mm-hmm. or within a knowledge universe as a knowledge broker. A knowledge broker, I define it as a trusted intermediary mm-hmm. who's able to take large amounts of information, mm-hmm. synthesize that information down into yeah. very useful packages mm-hmm. that can be then delivered to decision makers to help them mm-hmm. make better decisions, mm-hmm. based on the assumption that if decision makers have better information, they make better decisions. I'm not so sure about that all the time, but that's at least the idea. That's the first thing. The second is that the whole idea of epistemic community, mm-hmm. that all speak at the same level, use the same acronyms, mm-hmm. Have the same ontology or a word description of their universe. Mm-hmm. Those used to be communities that didn't communicate very well. Mm-hmm. They wrote letters, they published papers, they knew of each other, they saw each other at conferences, but that community or community of practice wasn't well linked. Mm-hmm. Given the changes in technology that have occurred over the last 20 years, mm-hmm. you can now bring together those epistemic communities into contact with each other using some of the new information technologies, whether it's listservs or emails or LinkedIn or Facebook or virtual private spaces or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You can have people that have a very narrow common interest and enable their ability to communicate with each other. These constituencies exist within the environmental policy community. Mm-hmm. There are people who are fascinated by farmers' rights issues, mm-hmm. access and benefits sharing under the Convention on Biological Diversity, interested in dry land management issues, etc. Mm-hmm. So what we have tried to do is to help create these virtual communities of practice mm-hmm. by setting up listservs. Mm-hmm. So we have approximately 12 different listservs. We've got a listserv mm-hmm. for climate change professionals mm-hmm. called Climate L, 23,000 climate change professionals who send from 8 to 10 messages to each other each day. Mm-hmm. It's not a discussion list, no flame wars. It's just people saying, hey, I've written a new paper mm-hmm. on how to manage carbon mm-hmm. Or count carbon or trade carbon or mm-hmm. whatever it is. And they'll send out a message, one message to the list address, and it's distributed to the 23,000.
And I must add too that all these are freely available to people.
Yeah. No, we really do believe that you can't set up paywalls. Right. It has mm-hmm. to, information has to level the playing field. Mm-hmm. And you can't have information haves and information have-nots. Right. So our model for publishing has been to raise money from governments. And we raise money from about 19 different governments that support our activities, and then we provide the information freely.
Now, do you see any risks in that it's an explosion of volume of information and the speed with which it's distributed and has to be filtered all the time? Do you see any risk involved? We certainly know with the email gate in the climate change talks what kind of fallout there was with that. But do you see any other risk in the speed which all this takes place?
Well, first of all, I think if you're doing knowledge management, which is what we are doing, you have to have good curators. Information curators are those people who, we call them our thematic experts, who know good information, solid information, good knowledge when they see it, because they've been working in these fields. It's almost impossible to vet things through a peer review process in real time. It just takes too long. So you have to trust that you've hired the really best people. I have about 16 thematic experts who work for me around the world. Our organization has no center. People work from home and they work online, and our thematic experts will be out there identifying activities that are going on, and then they will write up a précis of that activity and submit it to our content management platform. And then it's reviewed by an editor. So it's seen by a number of people who are really up to date in their field.
So there's some filtering that goes on in there.
Absolutely.
Teleconferencing, do you see that as something that's going to take place more and more?
Well, here in our office in New York City, we've just installed in the last year a high-definition telepresence unit, so that I can have meetings with Geneva and people at the International Environment House, as well as our other offices. And I foresee that in the future we're going to have more and more of these telepresence units, so that you will have in your office a place where you can sit down, you can dial up the IP address of another organization or individual's telepresence units, and have your meetings there in order to cut down on travel costs. This last 3 weeks I was here, Frankfurt, Bangkok, into South Africa, up to Abu Dhabi for the launch of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is fascinating, and then back into Bangkok for the climate change negotiations, and then home, so 30,000 miles. However, for the 3 years that I was in the Amazon, I ran 3 tree nurseries. Planting trees and distributing them through the Sindicato de Trabalhadores Rurais, the rural workers' unions. So I have personal carbon credit built up. Hopefully that's good enough to offset all of this traveling.
Now, do you see anything else in the horizon in terms of telecommunications or any kind of communication?
Thought that there was a future in virtual private spaces, where, for instance, you could have IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You could have authors of the upcoming assessment report meeting online in virtual private spaces, having their discussions and writing collaboratively chapters online rather than having to fly around the world. A lot of the preliminary scientific and technical stuff, some of the background work could certainly be done that way. But when the negotiators get together and say, listen, I'm going to trade you tigers for elephants.
You want to see the look in their eye.
And they do.
And what's in their hands.
They do. They're trading tigers for elephants.
Well, Kimo, listen, we appreciate your talking with us today. And I think it's a perspective that we don't hear very often over in Ireland, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.